we get started today, I guess I just would like to point out, unlike most webcasts we provide on a particular product or function within Maximo, today we'll be discussing licenses and the model that the changes to the model that IBM announced recently. Since some of the content is directly from IBM, and because IBM owns the software, we thought it'd be very valuable to have an IBM person on the call as well. So I'm pleased to be joined by Kurt. For those of you joining us in Canada, I'm sure you know Kurt. He runs kind of the Maximo software side of the things for us up here. But the information that we're presenting today applies to all customers, whether you're in any parts of the U.S. or Canada. Kurt, do you have a few things you'd like to mention before we get going?
I would. Thanks, Jason. Good morning, all. I first of all just want to say thank you to Untrax on behalf of IBM. We appreciate you guys holding this webinar and sharing this information. We think it's quite important and valuable for our clients to make better decisions. In the disclaimer mode, I would like to say that we do want to keep the topics to be relatively generic to overall terms. We know many of you have unique situations and are quite happy to have individual conversations as warranted, but we'd like to focus on the broader aspects and not drill into any one account's specifics, please. Thank you.
Okay, so for the agenda then, we'll just go over the current license model, make sure everyone kind of understands where the current state is today, and then announce as of October, IBM introduced concurrent licensing to the asset management suite. And then we'll discuss how we can track some of those licenses, go over a couple frequently asked questions as we move forward into the open Q&A. So I think we should have a fairly short presentation today, but hopefully there's a couple valuable pieces of information in here for you. So not necessarily going into the full history of Maximo, but over the last several years, IBM has been very responsive in listening to customers' needs through various user groups, conferences, and forums, and has been fairly adaptive over the course of it. So if we look at 22, they introduced the concept of self-service licenses, so a free license for people to be able to create desktop requisitions, to be able to create service requests, incidents, that type of thing. And then also brought in limited use licenses to the industry solution world. So if you were able to make those applications work for you with the three, that was of value to several people. And then they also introduced that concept of express use license, so a very casual light user. In 2014, limited use were now each individual limited use user was able to use 3 modules. It wasn't necessarily an organization decision anymore. And they brought EveryPlace, so the online mobile tool, they brought that into Core Maximo, so it was now included in the software. In February, the monthly part number, February of 2015, that's the SaaS aspect of Maximo now, so you're able to purchase Maximo as a service. And then last year, in the summer, bringing an aviation industry solution online and adding concurrency to express licenses. So this year, they're now announcing concurrent licensing for the Maximo portfolio. So if we look at the current entitlement sort of model, as you can kind of see through the spheres here, they very much build on each other. So if you start with that self-service I mentioned, and then it builds on express, limited, and full. As you can appreciate, when you get into full, the size and the scope of the user's access in the system grows exponentially, and the cost obviously associated with it goes up as well. A couple things to point out that I'm sure you guys are all aware of, but as you go up that chain, you do inherit the permissions of the previous license. So for example, when we talked about limited use licenses, they have access to 3 applications within Maximo, but because they inherit the express license, they also have full read access to the entire applications within the system. The other thing to note is there is ratios to be maintained. So if you think for every full license you can have 25 express licenses, for example. So there is some sort of ratio requirements on the licenses today, and that'll continue as well. So when we talk about concurrency now, so about a month ago, they announced concurrent part numbers for Maximo and several industry solutions. towards the end of the year, we will add in kind of the full suite of industry solutions, and then nuclear will come online early next year. So if you're a customer using nuclear, you'll need to wait a little bit, but for the others, we're able to have those part numbers for you in Q4 here. The idea behind it and the reasoning IBM did it was really just trying to strive for consistency across the portfolio. I think if some of you guys are software as a service customers, you've noticed you've had concurrency now for about a year. Tririga and Smart Cloud Control Desk users, you've noticed you've had concurrency before as well. And just in a general response to competitive pressure. So a lot of IBM's competitors are offering concurrent license models. So essentially this is kind of IBM's bridge to compete with that. It's best used to address shift work. So, you know, people, if you have a facility where people are flying in and out and they're on rotations and things like that, where, you know, person A works a week and then they leave and person B comes in, want a named user scenario, those would be 2 licenses where now they'd be able to share 1 concurrent license. So some additional details. The pricing is going to be based on a 3-to-1 ratio. So just based on some general IT terms and usage history. So they're basically saying a concurrent authorized user will be 3 times the price of an existing named user. It doesn't affect server install-based licenses, so things like spatial or the enterprise adapters that are priced by server won't impact that. Does include the monthly part number, so all the SaaS customers, it's there as well. And if you have a need to have some named users and some concurrent users, you absolutely can do that. Mixes are allowed. And there's a trade-up as well. So for customers that are existing named users, you've purchased those licenses, you don't want to have to rebuy licenses. It is possible to migrate to a concurrent model. There is a fee associated with the trade-up. We're not necessarily going to share any pricing information today because I think as Kurt alluded to, you know, there's different factors. Obviously, we have customers on both sides of the border. Exchange rates come into play, timing, volume, all that kind of stuff. But there is a fee associated with trade-ups, but you are able to trade up existing licenses to Maximo. There's some rules on trade-ups. You can't necessarily trade up, you know, an authorized user to a concurrent utilities user, for example. So there is a couple rules, but you are able to migrate your model or portions of your current model. I don't necessarily want to get into the definitions. This information will be in the deck that's available to people offline. But the couple things I do want to point out is that they're defining a concurrent user as someone who accesses the program at any given point in time. And a concurrent user, the way Maximo or the way IBM is going to be counting those now, is it looks at the current logged in users every minute, and then over a 24-hour period, it looks at the maximum value of that, and then establishes that as your concurrent usage base. So with the introduction of the new licenses, as you can appreciate, it's probably going to be a little bit harder to track some of this information. So what they've done is, as of version 7.606, so the most current version, they have introduced a license tracking application. So this application, once you patch up your Maximo to that version, will be in here for you and help you manage some of this information. The licensing model, so i.e. concurrent licenses, these are available to anybody on a supported version, so 7.5 and higher. You can buy concurrent licenses, but this tracking tool only applies to version 7.606, which came out October of this year. To enable it, you'll need to kind of create license records. So when you're starting to create these license records and users, we have to associate license types to users so that now when there's some cron tasks and KPIs built, it's able to actually look at that information. There's some additional documentation as well. So again, when you get the offline portion of this presentation, there's a link to kind of the detail on this on IBM's website. But what it's going to do in terms of, you know, tracking licenses, so as of right now, it's a bit of a work in progress, but you're able, anything with a check mark here, the license tracking tool tracks if we set up the users and licenses correctly. Anything with an X means it's coming. So in a future release, we'll be able to track oil and gas and utilities authorized users, hopefully in the next kind of release in the next quarter when that comes out. Anything with a dash it means, so something like where you see anywhere Concurrent has a dash, that just means that's not even a valid license. So you can't have a Concurrent anywhere user. With the license tracking application, it also provides a few reports. So it's really trying to help, it's really gauged at helping the system administrators start to administer the application. So we've got some canned reports that they can use to start to look at some statistics. We can look at, additionally even building some KPIs on their start centers to track some of this sort of information. So there is some tools now, and they're really coming a long way in terms of being able to help the users manage their license base. Because as you know, Maximo is a self-managed application. So IBM will never limit a user's access to the system, and the idea being that if it's critical to your business, they don't necessarily want licensing to get in the way of that. Now, the bad news is you need to have a mechanism then to make sure that you're managing to your entitlements, and this license tracking tool will help that. So that was kind of the crux of the discussion. Before we open up the phone lines to some questions that you have, I guess I just wanted to go over a few kind of stock questions that you may have and provide some answers to start the conversation. But like for number one, I think I just kind of spoke about was, does the tool stop unauthorized users from logging in? No. So it's still a self-managed and self-audited system there. Can a user log in and out before being counted? So as I mentioned, it's going to look at the login history, and anyone who's logged in, at a given minute over the course of a day, it's going to count. So depending on when your default, when you set up your logout sessions, that can impact it if you are in a concurrent model. So for example, we've had some customers that say, we don't like the default being 30 minutes. I go get coffee, I go to a meeting, I want to come back and use Maximo, and they set their their logouts to, 4, 5, 6 hours. If people close their browser window, they haven't actually ended their session. So if people are doing that consistently, it may artificially inflate some of your concurrent numbers. So you just have to, and for performance reasons, it's just good practice to remind your users always to be logging out when they're out of the system. Anywhere users, so if you're disconnected, are you consuming a concurrent license? Yes, because when that user logs back or gets a connection again and syncs up, they have a connection piece to Maximo that they're populating or pulling data into the database, so that counts as a session. Are there limited concurrent licenses? No, it's only for authorized and express. The use cases just seem to make the most sense in that regard. So. Mixing and matching, so really, the really only rules are you have to make sure you have the same number of concurrent licenses. So if you have 5 transportation licenses and you want to have, or you have 5 Maximo licenses and you want to add some concurrency transportation, you have to use 5 to get them up to that number. So you just need to make sure that they're equal. Can you have a mix? Yes, I think we kind of mentioned that already. So you can have a mix, whatever suits your business. But you do need to maintain those ratios that we pointed out earlier in the presentation. Can more than 3 users share a license? Absolutely. I think I mentioned 3 to 1 is really just kind of a standard industry term. If you guys have a 10 to 1, that's fine. The key is that whoever's logged in at one particular time is consuming a license. So just make sure that's what you're managing towards. And can users concurrent users migrate over to this model? The answer is no, but yes, you need to trade up. So there is a cost and a transaction associated to that. IBM needs to trade up the part numbers and the cost associated with it. So it's not just a straight, I have 30 licenses, can I now have 10 concurrent? There is a discussion point and a price associated with that transition. So before I open up the lines, I guess I just wanted to make one last point, and I didn't want to put it in writing yet because things are always subject to change, but we've heard some discussions with IBM that there's a potential end-of-life announcement for version 7.5 this coming April, which would mean from that point you have 12 months before support ends. So what that means essentially is that as of April 2018, version 7.5 wouldn't be supported anymore. So obviously that's subject to change. It's an internal discussion thing until there's an official announcement. It's not necessarily official. I guess I just wanted to get people starting to think about, the license tracking tool in version 7.6. There's all sorts of new features and functionalities around calculations and things. So there's lots of reasons to upgrade. We're in sort of Q4 right now, so as you guys are planning and budgeting for, next year's activities, you might want to consider factoring an upgrade in there. With the new license model here in Q4, that's typically a good time of year where IBM offers discounts. January always looms price increases, so, not to get too salesy, but it's probably a good time to start having these conversations and plan and budget for next year. So just wanted to make that point as well. At this point, Brian, do you want to maybe open up the lines and allow any questions that the group has?
All guests have been unmuted. You will now rejoin the meeting.
Okay, does anybody have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, I have a question. Rosanna from NAB Canada. I'd like to understand a little bit about your license tool. Is it the same product called LMT?
Sorry, there's just a little bit of feedback there. Could you maybe ask the question again? In regards to the license tracking tool?
Yes, I wanted to understand if it's effectively the same product that we've seen in the past, ILMT, referred to as ILMT.
Maybe I'll ask Kurt that. Yeah.
Yeah, I could respond to that. No, so the license tracking tool is actually, for Maximo, is actually an application built into Maximo. So it is very different from ILMT. It's basically we're adding capability into the Maximo product to help you self-manage, as opposed to ILMT, which is on the system monitoring for you.
Thanks, Kurt. Is there the question? Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Hello?
Yes.
I had a question about the end of life of 7.5. Is it 1 year after the announcement or 2 years after the announcement?
It's typically 1 year after the announcement. That's what it's been historically when they did for 7.1 and for 6. Obviously, everything's kind of subject to change, but it's typically 1 year. Okay. All right. I think if there's any other questions, please feel free to reach out. My contact information's on the slide. As Brian alluded to, this will be available for download as well. Kurt, did you have any closing comments you wanted to make?
Before you go, can I ask a question?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, this is Rob Mitchell at NAB Canada. There was a note there in the FAQ around managing concurrent license for offline use.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can you help me understand how do you reconcile the number of users that were in while the product was offline?
Yeah, this girl said enough.
Yeah, so are you referring to like an anywhere user?
Yes, okay.
Yeah, so when that anywhere user comes, so they're using the system offline. When they come back online and sync, when they establish that connection to the database, they're considered a user. So a practical example would be if you have like 50 field-based people, at any given time, maybe 10 of them are actually live, and that's fine. But what this is kind of just warning is whenever they establish their connection again, they're considered a user. So if your users, all 50 of them are out working all day, and at 5 p.m. they all come up and sync, and if they all sync in that kind of 4:55 right before the end of the day, that's going to count as 50 users then. So you just have to be careful around when those 50 people are reestablishing connections to the system, their sync.
Okay, I guess I misunderstood it. The way that the material read, it looked as if everyone who was using the product while they were offline were treated as concurrent users while they're offline, not when they reconnect.
Oh, okay. No, sorry, that would have been just poor wording on my part. I apologize.
Yeah, and that's not the intent. If you think about it, while they're offline, each one of those users has a mobile anywhere license. So that would cover all the offline use, and it's just when they're actively connected to the system, that's when they're additionally having concurrent usage.
I have a question as well. This is Ryan from Meg. Are you able to define when the shift change or when the licenses are counted? So if we have a start time of a specific hour on a day, that's when it starts taking the count, or is it just the end of it? Is it really just the end of it?
So what it's counting, I think I mentioned, is every minute it just looks at logged in users, and then it takes the maximum value over a period of time. So if you guys have your first shift on 1 week, really only those users should be using the system, and then when your next shift comes in, are you worried about like the changeover day when both shifts are on site at the same time?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, you just would have to be careful in those scenarios, right? Now, I guess oversimplifying it, when you're doing your shift handover, I'm assuming one guy's logged in and both users are sitting there at that screen together looking at it. So you're really only using one user anyways, but you would have to be careful in those scenarios.
Hello, this is Josh from Pittsburgh, California. I have a question as well.
Yes.
When you were talking about concurrent license management for the users, it kind of sounded like you were alluding that you have to define a single license for a group of users. It's not like dynamically concurrent. Am I correct on that?
I guess it depends, right? So unfortunately, what it would do is if all you have is concurrent, then it wouldn't matter so much because it's just going to look at who's logged in. But if you have a mix where some are concurrent and some are named, you need to somehow identify who's named, right? So that when it's counting who's logged in, it's excluding those those registered named users, right?
So if you're entirely concurrent, then you don't have to define. So I don't have to worry about two guys being in the same license group necessarily.
If everyone was concurrent, that's correct. You would just manage to your current sessions and your entitlement.
Okay. Okay. Just wanted to make sure of that.
Yep.
Thank you.
Jason, it's Kurt. Probably one other thing we should mention that we didn't have on the FAQ. In the past, there has been different questions around can we use a dummy user or a shared user ID. That is forbidden. That is, and it still is not allowed to have. So each user would be a named user in the system. They would just be of the concurrent type. So just in case anyone was wondering, I want to share that as well.
I've got another question. This is Ryan from Meg. Do we have the ability to keep track of the different module licenses? Or so, for example, if we've got oil and gas and fleet and base Maximo, are you able to identify with this new licensing tool that a specific user is using a specific license?
Like whether it be limited or authorized or express?
No, whether maybe they're using a transport license and oil and gas and an authorized license.
So in the short term, in the short term, no. So I think on that matrix I showed there, it's really only looking at base Maximo right now, but it is on their roadmap. So I would hope in the next feature pack release, which is every quarter. So when they say October, so hopefully January, that would be available for you to track. But it is something that you will be able to do eventually. I think there was a lady trying to ask a question too, Ryan, now that you're done. Did you have a question?
I had a question. I also typed it into the chat, but on the current limited use licenses where a user has access to 3 named modules, the definition that you put up earlier is the assumption that they have write and save access to 3 named modules, but that they could have read access to any of the other modules in the system?
That's correct, yeah.
Because of the inheritance?
Right, because they inherit the express user permission, so which allows them full read access. They can change status, and they can run reports. So those limited users would be able to do that as well.
Thank you.
And that's an existing thing. So if your question was very specific, feel free to make those changes now. That was an existing license entitlement.
Yeah, we've limited our users to not even being able to read other applications with our understanding.
Yeah.
I've got a question, Jennifer.
Sure.
On that same thing you were just talking about, if you have the industry solutions like HSE or oil and gas, does it also give them read access to those?
Yes, that's correct, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Question here from Tim Jackson in Houston, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to make sure that you said that this concurrent license model does not apply to the limited user license type. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Only the express and only the full use?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure.
And the idea is the way it was explained to me was just really that, either it's your, kind of your heavy users that are on shift work that are using multiple applications across modules need to share it, or, the guys that are just filling out work orders, that need maybe management needs read access to run reports. So it's really kind of the super casual or the heavy users that are going on a concurrent model.
Okay.
I've got a question here. It's James from the City of what is the effect to the annual S&F in moving to a subscription, moving to the concurrent model versus the named user model?
Yeah, no, good question. So it would be, because there's a trade-off associated to it. So you would, during the conversion of the license from one to another, the percentage is still going to be consistent. So it'll be kind of, the 20% of whatever you paid will be that SMS component, and then whatever annual increases that IBM applies would be the paid portion of that. So. But you would be, when you switch the license, you would switch to, that 3 times more expensive license now. So your maintenance bill, in theory, would be 3 times as higher, but you have the same number. You'd have less licenses, so it should be a wash in theory.
Yeah, but I guess the question is the new concurrent SNS based on the list price, the current list price of those concurrent licenses, or is it based on 3 times what our current maintenance is? I guess that's more a question for.
Yeah, James,
yeah. So go ahead, Kurt.
I can probably answer that for you. So the trade-up is a new cost that is essentially, if you will, in addition to your SNS that you're already paying is the foundation of the license. You trade up and you pay a little premium over top of that. So the renewal of the next year would consider the total cost of that license to be the former SNS plus this uplift, the 20% of the uplift. So it wouldn't artificially increase your SNS up to list price. So it'd be very similar to what it is.
And it's based on your purchase price as well. Sorry, Kurt, I was going to say, it's also based on your purchase price. So whatever you pay lower than list would be the foundation of your SMS going forward, not necessarily list.
Yeah, and that would be one where if there's interest in exploring, then let's work with your software rep to model the options for you, and then you can make an informed decision.
All right. If there's no other questions.
Sorry, I have one question. I had send it in the chat, but I guess I just want to, in terms of the concurrent licenses, so say you have your 20 authorized concurrent licenses for 60 people to access. Does the system generate a message when all the licenses are in use? In our case, so you're not going to have everybody, not all the users need to be signed in all the time. So as long as they're signing in and out, you can have any kind of combination. So will the system let users know when all licenses are in use?
No, it's not an active notification. You could set up a notification, as I'm thinking about it, when the conditions met like that. But I think, as I mentioned there, it's really just IBM never really wants to limit users, even from a notification standpoint, I guess. So you could technically, if you have 20, you could have 500 people log in, right?
Right. So this should be sort of help the administrators kind of monitor. Say, yeah, we have these 20 users, 40 people can be in, or whatever, 20 people can be in at a time. We got like 80 people. So as long as there's only 20 in at a time, you'd kind of want them to limit so the rest of them don't sign in.
So are you suggesting when a 20th person logs in, you email all 80 users that no one should log in right now?
No, just the next person. It would just be like an individual notification. Like I've seen it with other applications that have a concurrent model where your users are going in, and so you've got 20, and the 21st person goes in. There's a pop that says all licenses are in use. Try again, and then 20 minutes later he'll try in, and that person will get in because somebody else has signed out.
Yeah, it doesn't limit access to the system. I think we could develop, a notification that does that, like with an auto script or a notification. But no, it's not doing that right now out of the box.
Yeah, and I would just add, as an IBM statement, we even prior to IBM at MRO Software, our philosophy is that what you're doing with Maximo is very important to your business and critical to safety and performance, and we don't want you to not be able to access Maximo to do important work because you've hit your limit, right? We would rather you hit your limit, be aware of that, and then contact us to add more licenses because you're hitting your limit once a week, right? That's the idea. So we don't want to enforce that so strictly that it impedes your business.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. If there's anything else, please let us know offline. I guess, Brian, we'll turn it over to you to